Hey everyone, David here with a new review for episode 3 of season 6 of The Walking Dead. So obviously there's no way to start off this review than to talk about the humongous and very sentimental elephant in the room. After 5 successful seasons, obviously season 6 doesn't count because we're barely in the 3rd episode. After 5 long-running seasons, we bid farewell to one of the more likable, loyal, and courageous characters on The Walking Dead. That's right, we say goodbye to Glenn, whose last name I don't know. But Glenn, unfortunately, was killed in this episode in very dramatic fashion, and so it was a sincere... honestly, for a second there, I was like, please be a dream sequence or some kind of hallucination by Nicholas, and just cut back and have... have him slap at it and be like, oh, okay, everything's back to normal, and maybe he'll redeem himself in another way. But Nicholas kills himself and drags Glenn down with him to the ground, and that is unfortunately where Glenn meets his end. And not gonna lie, kind of emotional right now. I mean, I'm not gonna burst into tears necessarily, but I am very emotionally churned by the fact that a character that has been there literally since the beginning, since the pilot, is now unfortunately gone. Or is he? So immediately after this happened, Twitter and the rest of the internet just went up in a humongous craze, wondering, was that death real? Because apparently after everybody collected themselves, dried up their eyes with Kleenex and just analyzed the scene carefully, a lot of people are picking together certain details that might point to the possibility that maybe Glenn is not dead after all. So here we go. I'm going to point out all the significant details. Number 1, which is one of the more easier ones to really contrast, which is actually a little bit of a spoiler for the comic book. So if you're planning on reading the comic books, then don't, fast forward this video just a few seconds. But I'm going to go ahead and mention it real quickly. Spoilers for the comic books. In the running of Walking Dead comic books, Glenn is in fact killed. However, this is not how he gets killed off. He gets killed off in a much more significant, meaningful way. Whereas here, this is not at all what was intended for his character. So maybe that could be one of the signs that maybe this whole thing is not for reals. I mean, if they were to have changed it to kind of throw us off guard, then hey, it did its job, because like I said, that scene itself, and honestly I think the episode should have just ended with that, because I was still so dazed by it that all the material afterwards, I need to make some effort here to try to remember, because I was still thinking about Glenn and what may or may not have happened to him. But that's the first sign, is that Glenn does get killed off in the comics, but not in the same way. It's in a completely different way. So maybe that has yet to come. Maybe they're trying to soften the blow for later on. But that's the first sign. So hopefully, if you have skipped ahead, you're back with us. Sign number 2. Apparently in the shot where he's actually getting devoured, people have pointed out that the entrails that are coming out of him are coming out in a certain angle that's just very disproportionate to his body. So people are speculating that maybe Nicholas is on top of him and they're actually eating him, and maybe he's underneath and they're not getting at him. He manages to be shielded up by Nicholas's body, which wouldn't be that much of a stretch considering how he was holding him when they fell off that garbage bin. He was like kind of like hugging onto him, and he's like this. So body could be right here, falls over, like that. Body's right here, getting devoured. Maybe, like the stomach could be like around here. Nicholas is kind of crossing him like that. There you go. So hopefully that was a good demonstration of how that scene may have played out, and maybe what people are speculating could be one of those details, which is the direction of the entrails, the direction of the guts being pulled out. Never thought I would say that, but yes, that is in fact one of the things that people are saying that might be pointing to Glenn not being dead. Number 3, which is kind of like 2.5 because it kind of has to do with the whole intro thing. We didn't actually see a direct shot of Nicholas getting devoured. It's just all on Glenn. So I'm hoping that that's kind of like manipulation. Like, oh my God, Glenn is getting eaten. Well, why don't you just why didn't you ever cut to Nicholas getting eaten? I mean, his body should be down there as well. I mean, why is that not being specifically shown? We just see Glenn, and then we see that bird's eye view, and that's it. So the fact that they're not showing Nicholas at all kind of maybe, like I said, it kind of piggybacks onto that second detail that people are pointing out. And then detail number 3, which is a little bit of the more obvious one. There are some set photos. I'm not going to say specifically what's going on in the set photos, but let's just say that there's evidence in those set photos that people are thinking, okay, yeah, there's no way that he's dead. He's got to be still alive. Otherwise, those set photos would not make sense whatsoever. And unless they're throwing us for a loop, it's possible that maybe because of these set photos, we have not seen the last of Glenn. So I'm hoping that they fooled us, and honestly, if that was their intention, then they succeeded, because it's been a long time since The Walking Dead has managed to punch me in the balls that way. I mean, I felt bad for Noah's death and a couple of other deaths that happened in season 5, but none can hurt me more than seeing a character that we've seen literally from the beginning get killed off, especially one like Glenn. Oh yeah, and some other stuff happened in the episode too. Basically, just cutting to the chase, because, like I said, the biggest significant thing about this episode was the death, or potentially fake death, of Glenn, because nobody else is going to talk about anything else that happened in this episode besides that. I mean, come on. So let me just briefly cover some of the other material that happened within this episode, not only because of that, but also because I'm actually pretty tired. Just got back from work, having to wake up after just 4 hours of sleep, so I'm running on empty here. But let's briefly talk about the other material that happened in this episode, which was still good. Most of the episode focuses on Glenn and Michonne and the rest of this group that decide to try to get ahead of the herd, so that they maybe find a way to get it off course, with both Daryl, Sasha, and Abraham still keeping the other portion of the herd, because only half of the herd actually went into the woods. The other half is actually still keeping on course with the plan. And so Daryl, Sasha, and Abraham are still in the truck, driving all slow. At one point, Daryl has this contemplation about whether or not he should go and meet up with Rick, or just follow the course, and he ends up deciding to stick with the course. And which was a nice character moment. That's the thing, is that in the background of this episode, besides this big event, were some nice character moments. There was that one. There was Rick, mainly just doing an awful lot of running. Forrest Gump reference. Mainly doing an awful lot of running throughout the episode, and it isn't until the end where he has a nice, again, character beat where, like I say, he's become this ruthless a leader that says, hey, no matter what happens, some of these people are going to die. You just keep on going, all right? You're not going to be able to make it with all of them. Let's just face that right now. But then in that RV, he kind of starts to break down a little bit. You see that when he's trying to start up the RV. I'm like, okay, that's cool. We're seeing that old scared Rick come back just a little bit, especially when he figures out that he sees the baby food, and obviously the first two thoughts that come to his head, Carl and Judith. So obviously a little bit of humanity was brought back there to the forefront. And like I said, some nice character stuff happened within the group that we were following the majority in this episode, especially that scene between Heath, Corey Hawkins' character, Heath, and Michonne, that really harsh whisper fight that they had. That was a really good scene. And even though there's a slight possibility that Glenn is indeed dead, and makes this hate Nicholas even more, I have to give credit to him wanting to redeem himself, because many times he's kind of like, you know what, I'm good as dead. I'm hallucinating here. I'm breaking down. I might as well just give myself away. That's why he volunteers to go with Glenn and show him that he could be redeemed, and that's why at the end he says the phrase of the title of the episode, "Thank you," as he kills himself, because he figures, you know what, this I have to do this. I have to throw myself out there. It's just a shame that he dragged Glenn along with him. But again, speculation is still floating in the air for whether or not Glenn is still alive and with us. And then we had pretty much the red shirts of that entire group. You literally looked at these characters and said, they're dead. They're all dead, no matter how strong or cowardly they were, because right off the bat, at the beginning of the episode, we got this one character who's doing the exact same thing that Carter was doing in the premiere, and I'm like, please, for the love of God, kill this character off quickly. And I'm like, oh, okay, there you go, he's gone. So I'm super glad they got rid of this character, but still, I could have done without him. I don't know why they needed to bring forward even more frustrating characters, which would be probably my only gripe with this episode, would be that guy, the guy who ran away instead of trying to fight, which has come to be expected. I'm not complaining that this character was put there in the first place. I understand that characters like this are going to live in this world, and they're either gonna face their fears and become fighters, or they're just gonna run away and eventually run to their doom. And that's essentially what happened with that guy. But the people who did manage to live long enough to be able to fight and go out strong were some of these other much more likable red shirts, like this girl who acknowledges that she might as well just be left behind so that she can hopefully with her body slow down the walkers and give everybody else the fighting chance. And then you got that other guy who recognizes he's been bitten, and he's like, "Oh, I'm bitten. Let's keep moving." And I was like, okay, that's a likable character. You know what's coming. You know what's going to happen to you. Yet you are going to continue to go. And that's a characteristic that just makes any person likable. So he was nice. I was surprised that he didn't start showing effects of the bite sooner. So a little bit of discontinuity there with the lore of the walkers. But still, despite ending up a red shirt, much like with the other characters here in this episode, he still left an impression for the duration of the episode. I'm not going to remember him probably next week's episode or the one after that, but he did bring something out of Michonne, which is that conversation of how whether or not they were going to make it back to Alexandria alive. And I have to give them credit. Out of all these red shirt characters, guess who survived? The black guy. So yeah, there were a couple of frustrating characters early on in the episode, and there were some rather cool, likable stuff with the other characters that decided to continue fighting, no matter how inexperienced they were, and that inexperience kind of led them to their doom, but at least they went out strong. Of course, none of this matters because the big thing that everyone's going to be talking about, and the big thing that's still spinning around in my head as to whether or not it was real, was Glenn's seemingly death. It was very similar with something that S.H.I.E.L.D. did last week, where I'm like, I don't know if that exactly happened, and I'm not entirely sure if Glenn's demise is real myself. Regardless of whether or not it was real, though, it was executed beautifully with the music, with the slow-mo, but even beyond his death, it was a very exciting, nail-biting episode. There was just so many moments where I'm like, oh my god, you see all these herds of walkers, and the way it's shot, like, you're trying to look through the bodies, and you're like, did they grab it? Like, the entire episode was intense, and mixing that in with some of those character beats that the episode tackled while it was not handling the stuff with Glenn. Honestly, this made for probably my favorite episode of the season so far, and I know we're only 3 episodes in, but at least they're elevating the quality. So for that, I give Thank You a low 9 out of 10. So thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you guys thought of this week's episode of The Walking Dead. Were you left just struck with shock about Glenn's apparent death? And do you think he is still alive? Because certain details point to the possibility that yes, he is. I'll see you guys next week.